Welcome to History Unraveled with Dr. Duncan. I'm your host, Spencer Duncan, and today we're going prehistoric. To start our journey with Western civilization, we must ask the question, where should we begin? Traditionally, the Western civilization narrative starts with Greek culture, or as one of my professors referred to his Western Civilization Survey course as from Plato to NATO. However, jumping into Greek history misses some important context. Since this series is framed as a survey history of a distinct civilization, we have to get to quote-unquote civilization itself. As I said in my previous video, the word and concept of civilization is quite complicated, even though at its core, it was used to distinguish any society that had developed cities, hence its etymological origin as civitas, which simply means pertaining to a city. Over the centuries, it has collected some additional baggage. And with the progression of this series, we will consider some of the connotations and nuances of the concept of civilization and how it has changed. But let us begin by making our way to cities. It is from the creation of cities that we launch into the genesis of Western civilization in ancient Greece. So what are the ingredients for a city building society? Is a city just a collection of buildings or a gathering of people? Is it a place to shop? There's a lot of different approaches you could take to this, but we're going to start with four pretty basic ingredients to give us a city building society. First and foremost, you have to have people. It's impossible for you to have a city without people, which means that we do have to describe the actual rise of the human race, the increase in population, and what types of changes are going to make it necessary for us to eventually get to enough people in one place to start to create cities. Second, you are going to have some kind of commerce and agriculture. It's pretty hard, especially in the early days, for you to have a city if you don't actually have significant interaction, especially the basis of agriculture. We are going to remain a predominantly agricultural society clear until the 20th century. And so that is something that is going to play a huge part, not just the first part of the rise of civilization, but it's going to be a significant part of this entire series, because you just cannot overstate the significance of agriculture on the development of pretty much every different civilization that I can think of. Also, for building cities, you're going to need laws and a judicial system. Now, not all of these laws and judicial systems are going to necessarily have written constitutions or have some kind of code of Hammurabi, but something does develop. Even if there's a lot of unwritten rules, you are going to have some type of force that is dictating the way people are allowed to interact with each other. And presumably, in most cases, it is also designed to help protect individuals' properties. And we'll certainly see how that is going to develop over the centuries. Last but not least, and probably one of the more controversial elements of giving us a definition of a civilization and of a city building people, would be some kind of manifestation of thought. This is usually going to be in the form of writing. This is most famous when we look at stuff like hieroglyphics or cuneiform, but we can find other elements that are some kind of manifestation of thought, particularly in the creation of works of art and pottery and other sorts of craft. But we will probably have the most extensive conversation specifically on the development of writing. We will certainly try to touch upon the other ways that we see manifestations of thought. I'm sure you can name other aspects that you consider important to defining a civilization, or maybe take issue with ones that I have named for one reason or another, but we will stick to these four to give us a valuable outline and to give us the easiest way to approach the rise of what we need to create our earliest civilizations. Let's start with people. Humans have existed for roughly 200,000 years. Before that, hominids or human-like ancestors existed for probably another 3 to 4 million years. However, we've only had written language for about 5,000 years, so only 2.5% of the time since humans first walked the earth, which means there is a lot of past that we can't account for. Anything before the development of writing is known as prehistory. We have to rely on sources like archaeology and carbon dating and dendrochronology and any other resource to help us understand what happened before writing existed. And admittedly, it is limited. We can't really get into the minds of people that didn't leave a written record, but they did leave us some clues, and we will take a look at what those clues are and how they can help us best understand a world that didn't have a written language. Let's take a look at the first humans themselves. Now, this can be a bit complicated, so bear with me in explaining the emergence and development of people. Like I said, the earliest human-like creatures, or hominids, developed 3 to 4 million years ago, probably somewhere in South and East Africa. They were known as Australopithecines, and they are noted for making very simple tools. About 1.5 million years ago, a physically larger species developed, which we have dubbed Homo erectus, who actually used bigger and more complicated tools. But more importantly, Homo erectus was the first species of hominid to leave the African continent and migrate into Europe and Asia. There is some controversial evidence of hominids evolving separately in other parts of the earth. This is called the multi-regional theory. However, the current theory that I'm discussing, the out of Africa theory, has significantly more support and evidence. And there's a lot of reasons why that might be, and we will see that as we discuss more in later episodes. Our actual species, the Homo sapiens sapien, first emerged in Africa between 200,000 to 150,000 years ago. Approximately 170,000 years ago, give or take 50,000 years, there was a Homo sapien who all humans maternally descend from. She is commonly called the mitochondrial Eve. Our genetic material is a combination of both our parents, but the mitochondria in each cell, which you may remember from biology is the powerhouse of the cell, it actually has its own distinct DNA, which means it is passed from mother to child, and this passing is done at a consistent rate with a reliable amount of variation over time, and it is far more consistent and easier to develop a theoretical map of development across all humanity, so we can trace our genetic material back to this theoretical maternal ancestor. Current research and a mapping of the changes over time suggests that mitochondrial Eve lived in what is now modern-day Botswana. Just as we have a theoretical matrilineal ancestor, we all have a common patrilineal ancestor referred to as genetic Adam or Y chromosomal Adam. To be clear, genetic Adam and mitochondrial Eve were not married. Our genetic Adam was probably actually a descendant of mitochondrial Eve, although fixing a date to genetic Adam's existence is more challenging than mitochondrial Eve's because of the genetic diversity. There is evidence of migration out of Africa roughly 70,000 years ago, and arriving in Europe about 40,000 years ago, in East Asia and Australia probably about 50,000 years ago, and North and South America somewhere between 15,000 to 12,000 years ago. As the Homo sapiens sapiens migrated, they encountered other descendants of their common ancestor. For example, Homo sapien Neanderthals. Genetic evidence shows that the Homo sapiens sapiens in Europe and Asia interbred with the Neanderthals, and around 30,000 years ago, the Neanderthals were nearly extinct except in the genetic material they passed on through breeding with Homo sapiens. In fact, people of European and Asian descent have an average of 2.5% Neanderthal genetic makeup. By 8000 BCE, Homo sapiens sapiens had migrated to all of the inhabited continents, and by reproduction or possibly by violent means, they had become the only species of human left of which all living humans are now descended. I'm sure you've heard the phrase the Stone Age, possibly in reference to cavemen or dinosaurs, I don't know, possibly a reference to your parents' childhood. Regardless, the Stone Age covers 2.5 million years ago to about 6,000 years ago, and it is a reference to the earliest days of humans and human ancestors that first started to distinguish themselves through the use of even the most basic tools. The Stone Age is split into three phases. The first phase is the Paleolithic Age. Paleo means old and lithic means stone in Greek, and it is our oldest age. It begins when we first saw hominids using stone tools. It lasted from 2.5 million years ago until about 10,000 BCE. Which is also the time we see the dominance of Homo sapiens over all other human species. This period is characterized with pretty rudimentary stone tools. Humans were hunter-gatherers, which meant they lived off of food they caught or collected, but they did not have any form of plant domestication. The majority of their lives were spent seeking out animals to kill, fish to catch, or fruits, berries, and wild grains to collect. The aforementioned caveman would have been during this time. We can only assume they led a nomadic life in bands of a couple dozen people. They followed the cycles of plants and the migration patterns of animals. Even with clear divisions of labor, this still probably meant a rough equality of men and women. As time progressed, so did the sophistication of their tools to spears and bows and arrows and hooks and harpoons, which all helped with killing animals. Early structures of wood or large animal bones and animal skins became their first simple constructed shelters. Around 500,000 years ago, so again before Homo sapiens, hominids first started to use fire. This was helpful for providing heat and light at night, but it also flavored food, preserved it, and made it easier to digest many foods, especially grains. In the Paleolithic Age, humans began to develop what we would now identify as religion, or at least some form of worship. In addition to burying their dead, humans created artwork that reflected certain values. There are several examples of Venus figurines that have been unearthed mostly in Europe and Asia. Most of them date to somewhere between 26,000 and 21,000 years ago. I put Venus in quotes because these objects date to as early as 40,000 years ago, which means they long predate Roman mythology, but they are called Venus figurines because of the qualities that they display. You can see that breasts and the buttocks and the stomach and hips and the vulva are exaggerated, to put it mildly. Additionally, usually there are no hands, feet, or face. In other words, the focus is on the female reproductive and childbearing features, which suggests a worship of fertility. Another example of religious development are cave paintings, such as the famous ones found in Chauvet and Lascaux, France. There are plenty of animals that humans probably hunted, like deer. But the lions and the bears and the owls and other animals depicted that the humans did not hunt lead us to believe this was an expression of some kind of reverence or even possibly some kind of worship. Unfortunately, without a written record, it is impossible to know for sure the details of prehistoric religious beliefs. But these are evidences of a developing species considering their place in their environment. At the tail end of the Paleolithic age, hunter-gatherers started the domestication of some animals. The dog was probably the first animal to be domesticated. Around 13,000 BCE, dogs became a companion of humans, somewhere in the Middle East. Human graves as early as 12,000 BCE have been found with dogs in them. It's hard to understate how valuable dogs were to humans. They were helpful for hunting and protection and just general companionship, and admittedly as a food source as well. Around 10,000 BCE, sheep and goats were also domesticated, also in the modern Middle East. Similar to dogs, they provided sources of meat, but they could also be milked and sheared for wool. Around 7,000 BCE, cattle and pigs were domesticated in Eastern Sahara and Western Asia, respectively. Around 6,000 BCE, chickens in Southeast Asia. Around 5,500 BCE, horses in Central Asia. Over the centuries, other animals such as donkeys and camels and honeybees and silkworms have all been domesticated, and cats have continued to be useless. Cats actually probably domesticated themselves because they were drawn to large human populations where mice and other prey could also be found. As we'll see, cats played a significant role in some cultures, most famously the Egyptians. These domestications started just as their nomadic hunter-gatherers' lives were shifting, which brings us to our next age. I mentioned that we segment the Stone Age into 3 periods. To be clear, this is just a tool for archaeologists and paleontologists. And splitting it into 3 sections is just something the human mind gravitates towards. It's called a 3-age system, and we will encounter it again. The second phase of our Stone Age chronology is the Mesolithic or Middle Stone Age, and it is one of the most challenging periods to define in prehistory. It represents a transition between the Paleolithic and the Neolithic, yet it does not fit neatly into a uniform timeline across the world. In reality, human societies did not change in a linear or synchronized manner. In some places, people moved from hunter-gatherer lifestyles to settled agricultural communities much earlier than in others. The term is mostly commonly applied to Europe and parts of the Middle East, where it marks the period between the end of the last glacial maximum and the introduction of farming, roughly between 15,000 and 5,000 years ago in Europe and 20,000 to 10,000 years ago in the modern Middle East. Despite the lack of exact dates, the Mesolithic is important because it signifies a shift in human behavior, and because, as I told you, there are 3 periods. In the Mesolithic period, people moved away from large game hunting and toward more diverse subsistence strategies, including small game hunting, fishing, and plant gathering. It also saw the development of more refined tools, sometimes including pottery and textiles, though true agriculture societies would not emerge until the Neolithic period. That is a defining feature of the Neolithic time frame. The Mesolithic is marked by the creation of semi-permanent settlements, often located near coastal areas and inland waterways, which provided stable food sources, which, though important, are still not quite the major revolution that doesn't come until the Neolithic period. About 12,000 years ago, so roughly 10,000 BCE, the final ice age was subsiding. Humans were venturing farther north, and several major developments occurred among some humans in parts of the world. These changes are collectively referred to as the Neolithic Revolution. Neo is Greek for new, and lithic, it still means stone, so it is the dawn of the new Stone Age. There were new tool developments like clay pottery, which was helpful in cooking and storage along with woven baskets. New tools for cultivating plants developed. Sickles and hoes helped to harvest plants. Needles were invented as plants and animals were used to make thread for cloth production. However, none of these are individually as significant as the most impactful innovation of all time, the development of agriculture. Humans started to plant and harvest their own sources of food instead of a reliance on nomadic hunting and gathering. Additionally, as I've already mentioned, humans had long started the process of domesticating animals. We talked about some of the smaller animals, the mammals like the goats and the pigs and the sheep and the cattle, which provided meat and milk and leather and wool. But in this new phase, larger animals are going to be used as beast of burdens to help in the process of this agricultural revolution. This is going to come with a variety of consequences. The ability to harvest plants and domesticate animals led to a much more stable lifestyle. which facilitated even more complicated tools and more permanent structures. Different plants and animals were domesticated in different parts of the world. Starting around 8000 BCE, beans and potatoes and corn were cultivated in the Americas. Rice and millet were cultivated in South Asia. Millet and yams were cultivated in Africa. And lentils, wheat, and barley were cultivated in the Near East, in what we now call the Fertile Crescent around the Tigris and Euphrates rivers in what are now modern-day Iraq and Turkey. Which means that the humans that were settling down and participating in this agricultural revolution stopped their nomadic, less predictable lifestyle and started to create settled and more stable lives. The development of agriculture meant humans could create more food than just what they needed for themselves. This, of course, gave rise to trade and commerce, one of the oldest and best preserved examples of a Neolithic community developed in modern-day Turkey at a place called Çatalhöyük. Fruits and nuts and wheat have all been excavated there. Evidence of weapons and tools and jewelry have also been unearthed. Statues of females, again with all of those oversized features, have been found with religious shrines of gods and goddesses. The village walls enclosed 32 acres, and at its height, somewhere between 6700 BCE and 5700 BCE, it had as many as 6,000 residents. The simple mud houses were built so close to each other that people walked on the roofs to get from home to home, where they would climb in through a hatch in the roof. Another major Neolithic village teetering on the precipice of an early city was Jericho. It was in between modern-day Israel and Jordan. By 6800 BCE, they had started to build an impressive stone wall to enclose the developing town. It covered at least 8 acres, and its population was probably somewhere around 3,000. They specialized in pottery, which was helpful for storage, but also for cooking and for fermenting. The Neolithic shift to an agrarian lifestyle brought monumental changes to the human race. In addition to providing more food, development in technology, domestication of animals, it also provided a completely new atmosphere. Early trading developed into much more complicated commercial activity. Populations exploded. The human population in 10,000 BCE was somewhere between 1 to 5 million humans, and it had not changed much in hundreds of thousands of years. In the year 1 CE, it had grown to 300 to 400 million, and now there are over 8 billion people. Of the 120 billion people that have lived on the earth, only about 6 to 7% are currently on it today. The Neolithic Revolution facilitated this growth. Family life was completely altered. The equality between sexes started to break down. We see the emergence of a patriarchy where men dominated society and politics in new and dramatic ways. The shift to a grain-based diet provided more food, but it caused at least a minor decrease in human stature. The close proximity of so many people meant the spread of diseases had a much farther reaching impact. And I can go on about what to hate about city life here on my computer in my climate controlled house with an excess of calories in my fridge, freezer, cupboard, desk drawer. But of course, we will eventually get to all of that. It's worth noting that not everywhere experienced the shift to agriculture at the same time. This is a course on European history, yet most of these early civilizations are in the modern Middle East. Much of Europe was uninhabitable until the end of the last ice age, again about 10,000 BCE. Archaeologists have uncovered non-agricultural settlements in Scandinavia that date to about 5000 BCE, and between 2400 BCE to 2100 BCE, well into the development of agriculture and city buildings in places like the Fertile Crescent and Egypt. The humans in the British Isles were building the impressive hinges like the famous Stonehenge, as well as Bluehenge and Woodhenge, which still carry considerable mystery to those who study this culture, but these hinges and the people that built them were far behind other parts of the world in building large urban centers at that time. Now for a short digression. As humans developed agriculture and domesticated animals, another resource was unfolding: the spoken word. Humans used forms of spoken language since the Neanderthals, but it is hard to trace the earliest forms of language, and today there are more than 6,500 different languages in dozens of language families all over the world. The most important language family to European speakers is the Indo-European family. Almost all languages spoken in Europe belong to the Indo-European family. The main divisions are Romance, which include the descendants of Latin, such as Spanish, French, Portuguese, and Italian, the Germanic languages, such as, well, of course, German, as well as Dutch, Swedish, Danish, and my beloved English. The Slavic languages, which include Russian, Polish, Czech, Ukrainian, and many others. However, the Indo-European language family is larger than just Europe, hence the name. Since the 16th century, travelers to the Indian subcontinent had noticed certain similarities between Indo-Aryan and Iranian languages, such as Persian and Hindu, with some European languages. In the late 18th century, the English scholar Sir William Jones presented the hypothesis of a larger Indo-European connection by comparing three of the oldest written languages: Sanskrit, Latin and Greek. For example, father in Latin is pater. In Greek, it is also pater. And in Sanskrit, it is a very similar pitar. In addition to noticing the similarities, Jones presented the idea of a language from which all of these modern Indo-European languages are descended, or a Proto-Indo-European language. Based off of all the evidence that we have, we believe the Proto-Indo-European language developed in the Pontic-Caspian area of Eurasia between 4500 and 2200 BCE, somewhere between the Black and the Caspian Sea. Using the wide array of the language's descendants, linguists have cobbled together an interesting understanding of the speakers of Proto-Indo-European. They had a word for northern animals and trees like sheep and cattle, but they did not have terms for southern animals or trees like dates or palm trees. By 4200 BCE, they had domesticated horses, they had also created a wheeled cart, and they developed copper and bronze tools and weapons. They were pastoral and somewhat nomadic. With their use of metal tools, horses, and carts, they started to migrate. By 4000 BCE, they moved into Anatolia or modern-day Turkey. Around 3500 BCE, they made it into parts of northern China. Celtic and Italic languages started as early as 3000 BCE. Greek somewhere around 2500 BCE, and Sanskrit around 2000 BCE. We will come back to the importance of this language family in later episodes, but I wanted to put it on your radar because it is really hard to underestimate the impact of this language family on the development of Western civilization. Alas, all good things must come to an end. Sometime between 4000 and 3000 BCE, the Neolithic cultures and villages changed. They began to grow in size, and their tools and weapons experienced a major shift. Evidence shows mining ore to obtain copper for human use before 4000 BCE, but in the subsequent millennium, zinc was added to the copper to create bronze, a stronger and more durable alloy. The next 1800 years are characterized by the widespread use of bronze. Its use in tools and weapons facilitated major growth in the towns and the development of armies. And so we will explore in the subsequent episode the dawn of the Bronze Age. If you're enjoying this content and want to help keep it going, consider joining my Patreon. Researching, writing, recording, and editing these videos takes a lot of time, and your support makes it possible. As a patron, you'll get access to exclusive content, behind-the-scenes updates, and early releases to my videos. Whether you're a student looking for extra resources or just someone who loves history, your support helps make this channel the best it can be. Check out the link in the description to visit my Patreon page. Every contribution helps. Don't forget to like, subscribe, turn on those notifications. Thanks for watching, and until next time, stay curious.